Hey, everybody, welcome. My name is Connie Jacobs, work for BLM, and I'm the program lead for conservation lands for the state of Colorado. What I'd like to do is welcome the three panelists we have. I don't know that we've ever done this before with NWSI, but the idea behind this panel was an opportunity to kind of question and answer or find some solutions or at least beginnings of solutions to maybe either issues you're having in the field with your wilderness areas, wilderness study areas, lands with wilderness characteristics, or an NGO group that might be working with an agency or doing work out on wilderness grounds. So I'd like to introduce these folks. I'll just introduce them by name. They'll each take a couple of minutes to give a little more background and fill you in on some of their information and their details. And then what we could do is start out with some questions. I've already got a couple in my mind I'd like to ask the panel. So based on your questions, it may be appropriate for all three of our guests to respond, and it may be appropriate for one or two to respond. So depending on where we're at with that, we'll just kind of go with the flow. So you're welcome to put questions. We do have a moderator as well. That might be me and a host. So we're going to be tracking questions in the chat. We also may be able to just take live questions as well. So I guess at this point, I'd like you all to mute yourself for now. Make sure your cell phones and everything are muted as well, just to minimize distractions. And then as we get to the question and answer period, you can either put your question in the chat, and we'll try to take them in the order we can. And then also you can raise your hand and we'll call on folks, hopefully in the order that they appear. So if that works for everybody. Ralph Swain is with me. I've got his name in the caption below. There's Ralph. I'd like to welcome Ralph. He's retired from the U.S. Forest Service, one of our local legends, and one of the best guys all around. We have Heather MacSlarrow here from Society for Wilderness Stewardship. And she's been working hard to partner with BLM and kind of come into things from the NGO side of the game, and is very helpful for agencies. And then Peter, thank you so much, Peter Keller, who is currently in an acting role, not in BLM Wilderness Lead, but we'll take you anyway. But anyway, Ralph, would you like to get started? Give a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll do Heather and Peter. And I'll duck out of the screen here for Ralph.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ralph Swain. I'm retired Forest Service. I actually retired 4 years ago, so 2020 is when I retired. But I retired as the Regional Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Program Manager for the Rocky Mountain region of the Forest Service. It was my honor to oversee wilderness areas in the 5 states of the Rocky Mountain region. I actually started my career in the Forest Service firefighting on a hotshot firefighting crew in California, and then advanced from there, like so many of us, as to trails, wilderness program manager, and eventually wilderness at the district level, forest supervisors level, and then at the regional level. My degree, for college, my degree, undergrad is in marketing and economics. And my master's is in natural resource management with a specialization in wilderness. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. Heather.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. It's fun. It's so fun to hear Ralph talk. Ralph is one of my favorites, as is Peter. But Ralph was one of the people who was on the board when I was hired in my current position. So it's fun to kind of see how it all comes back around. So my name is Heather MacSlarrow. As Connie said, I'm the executive director of the Society for Wilderness Stewardship. I've been in this role now a little over 9 years. So when I started in wilderness, I got my undergraduate degree in environmental studies. And then I went to work, like Ralph said, on trails and worked with conservation corps for a number of years, kind of worked my way up to where I started my own corps And I was there for 5 years and building. Really what I did during that time was learn how to build and grow organizations pretty rapidly. And then I went to graduate school and got my graduate degree, also Master's of Natural Resources. And then this job came up. Someone sent it to me who actually is in Colorado. Ralph probably knows. And I've been here ever since, similarly growing this organization. When I started, SWS had actually never had a staff member before. So I was the first staff member, and we now have over 25 staff and an annual budget of around $2 million. I think in those days it was an annual budget around $20,000. So, and actually when I first started, I was trying to look at our tax history, which if you know nonprofits, you know, is a big deal. You need to file your taxes every year like a person. And there was just a note in the file saying that we sent a postcard to the IRS. And I thought, oh my God, I started working for an organization that's out of tax compliance because I didn't know if you were so small, you could just send a postcard to the IRS. So we've done a lot of growth in the last 9 years, and that's given me kind of a different perspective also on the wilderness connectivity game. That's me. I'll hand it to Peter.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Keller, the National Wilderness Program Lead for the Bureau of Land Management. I'm on an assignment outside of the agency for a month, but Kirsten Hines has volunteered or volunteered, I'm not sure which happened, to backstop me while I'm gone, and she's doing just a fantastic job. I don't know if I ever really need to come back. She's doing fantastic. I just thank you so much, Kirsten. So I'm based in Reno, but right now I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm on an assignment with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and we're on the Sudan response team. So in Sudan, there's a civil war taking place right now. So I'm working with the team of people trying to figure out the best way to get crucial supplies, food, shelter, and so on to people in need there. So it's very totally different work than my day job, but it's great to use different parts of the brain cells and try that out. My history a little bit like everyone else there. I started in trails, wilderness trails, 1985. I was a wilderness trail crew for the Forest Service in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Then I went on to work with the Park Service, and then the USAID and the Forest Service and a few other agencies. So I guess I just don't know where I fit in. So I seem to go across different agencies, but I think I worked in about 6 or so different agencies so far. But yeah, a variety of domestic work with 3 of the land management agencies, and a variety of international work with Department of Interior's international program, with USAID, and then I was on a fellowship for several years down in Chile and Argentina, writing about environmental issues down there. And I did have the chance once to work alongside Ralph when he was in R2. I was in R5 as the regional wilderness specialist. So it was great. I got to learn a lot from him and steal a lot of his great ideas. So I sort of figured out over the years that all the great ideas are already out there. It's just finding them and taking them, but giving proper credit. But back over to you, Connie.
I guess at this time, if folks have questions, go ahead and add them to the chat or raise your hand. I've got just 1 or 2 to maybe break the ice, but my hope is folks will chime in and feel comfortable in kind of getting the conversation going. And this is not scripted, just so you know. So this is going to be just kind of as it comes and random. So folks, please chime in. We'll look forward to hearing your questions and seeing what our responses will be. But I think the first question I have that maybe would kick us off, and you could each kind of speak to this a little bit, would be, you've got some fantastic experience, all of you, both inside the agencies, outside the agencies, and a fairly broad perspective on wilderness and wilderness related either management or topics. So what are some of the things you've seen over the course of each of your careers that are, that you've seen happen or been a part of and witnessed that are both good for wilderness and then also something that may not be so good for wilderness? If you could each kind of speak to that you've seen looking back over your career. Whoever would like to go first. Heather, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can take that one. And there's so many things, I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly. One thing I remember when I started in this job, which was not that long ago in terms of the trajectory of wilderness, but there was a really big discussion happening about wilderness relevancy and how we maintain the relevancy of wilderness and how you get the general population to care about wilderness so that they will elect leaders who care about wilderness. And then, wilderness will continue to be something that we have as a resource in this country. And it's interesting because I think, now what we all talk about a lot is how much interest in wilderness has exploded, right? Pre-pandemic and then certainly post-pandemic, as far as the level of recreation that's happening in wilderness areas, there's a lot of discussions about urban proximate wilderness areas and what that means for management goals and targets. I remember, one of the first trail crews that I led was actually in Rocky Mountain National Park, a lot of which is wilderness. And it was really common that you would see, there's a road through the park that's always packed. And the beginning of all the trails were always packed. But when you got like a mile back, there was nobody back there. And now it's really different. I think most of the places I go, and I hear from people who've been longtime members of our organization that, they used to be way in the backcountry and they never saw anybody. So I think there's been an explosion of growth and interest. I think that that has some detrimental impacts, of course. It makes it really difficult to manage for wilderness character, especially when you have to be balancing the level of staffing and resources an agency has to do so. We also have seen, especially in the last five or 10 years, a really much needed spotlight on providing access to wilderness for people who've been traditionally underserved. So I think we're at this moment right now where we're trying to balance that. That's a good thing for wilderness. We want everybody to be able to access it. But then we also have this question of how do you balance recreation and love of wilderness so that you can also manage for wilderness character. I think too, just to put that, in kind of a broader context, while we've seen that happen, we've seen such a growth in, of course, development outside wilderness, which puts pressure on wilderness areas and wilderness ecosystems because they're disconnected, because there's more anthropogenic change that is happening. And as they're disconnected, they're less resilient and able to function appropriately. So I think you have this kind of explosion happening in wilderness and then also happening outside of it, which is great as people come closer again, they can access it more, but then it puts more pressure on the ecosystem. I think I could probably go on. There's so many things that have changed, but I will hand it off to one of these great guys.
Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, go ahead, Ralph. I mean, I don't have much more to add on. Just really quick, sort of the good for wilderness is that there continues to be a passion. There's always been a passion for wilderness, whether it's people who work within wilderness. So that is a good thing that continues. And then wilderness continues to inspire people. I'm here in Washington, D.C. this month, and you just talk to people at dinner or wherever and some happy hour, and you tell them what your day job is. They're like, oh, wow, that's great. They're all excited about it and things like that. So, it just continues to inspire people and sort of captivate their imagination. So I think that's really good. One of the maybe not so goods is that I started 35, 40 years ago, first time in wilderness. And it seemed like some of the topics are very circular and sort of come back around again and again. I'm like, oh, I thought we solved this one back in 2000 or whatever. And they sort of continue again. So that's sort of one that gets sometimes can be frustrating that we continue to revisit some topics over and over again. But Ralph, I'll go back to you.
Well, both of you, good points. Heather and Peter, thank you. Since I'm the retired older one here, I'll think back and really take it from a perspective of internal within the agency. And I'll never forget, as a young wilderness ranger, I was already taking formal college courses in wilderness, but yet I had a district ranger or a line officer that really didn't know much about wilderness. In fact, I'll never forget, back in those days, we'd go out for 10 days at a time on patrol in wilderness. And as you're loading the 6-pack, the green rig, and getting all the gear ready for that 10 days, the crosscut saw, the tools, your backpack, all that. My district ranger actually came out to the vehicle and said, "What exactly do you do back there in wilderness? What is it? What is wilderness? What is a wilderness ranger's job?" I said, "Come with me. Let's do a 10-day tour. Come out and be with me." And he took me up on that offer. 2 weeks later, he actually joined me on a patrol in wilderness. And it was eye-opening for him to see the research plots that we were involved in, the public contacts, educating people to leave no trace, all the different things that a ranger will do back there, the trail work, everything, breaking fire rings. But then over time, I think I've become most impressed with the fact that line officers today have a better understanding and appreciation of the value of wilderness and how much it means to the American people, how important it is to the agencies, and their role in leaving a legacy for their job as the line officer, making good decisions and making sure we take care of the wilderness character. And I'm just impressed with today's line officers. They want to do the right thing.
Excellent. All right, I'll scoot back in here. Do we have any questions from the field yet, or? I've got another one I can lob that these folks have no idea is coming their way, so it could be fun.
We had a hand up from Bob, Bob Hazelton. Bob, I saw your hand went down, and then Cody after that.
Sure, I'll toss in here. My biggest disappointment, I guess, to answer the question is anytime I see or experience the cherry stemming of a wilderness area. And thankfully, it didn't happen in the San Gorgonio Wilderness where I volunteered for 11 seasons, but certainly out in Joshua Tree National Park, there were a lot of existing roads that were cherry stemmed through or into the wilderness. And it's one thing to be walking along in the desert all by yourself in a wilderness area and then have a truck go roaring past because it's on a non-wilderness road. And then the other kind of disappointing thing is the insistence, usually from people who are new to wilderness, on we should be able to use chainsaws, and it's a long discussion that has to be had in terms of education, but it just points out the lack of I guess courage, to use Dr. Nash's term, for people who think they want to get something done quickly, but aren't appreciating what wilderness is providing for people who go there and even people who don't. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you very much for those observations and those comments. Does anyone on the panel want to kind of address either of those? And that would be the cherry stemming and the tendency to build cherry stems or allow for cherry stems in the wilderness, and then new folks to wilderness not seeing the finite or fine differences between using mechanized equipment in a wilderness area. Any thoughts on that?
I could speak to the second part if Peter or Ralph want to speak to cherry stems first.
Well, I mean, on cherry stems, it's so we work on a lot of in the national office headquarters BLM and all the other three agencies too, work on legislation quite a bit that comes through. We get the maps and we finally see where these cherry stems are and try to fix those where we can. But it's to really get involved early in the process, and a lot of times we don't get the legislation or the map until the 11th hour. Whether it's from the advocacy group that's promoting it or others, or from the member of Congress. So it's just trying to get involved early. We, within the BLM, wrote a guidebook sort of for our own staff on how to navigate through that process. There's a lot of things you want to think about too. Like in BLM, we got the guzzlers and things like that. So in addition to cherry stems, that when you're putting together a legislative package to think through that process, but the roads and the cherry stems can be problematic.
Peter, I'll add to that I'm thinking specifically in Colorado with the 1980 Colorado bill and then the 93. In both cases, I was fortunate to be involved with the early mapping and the recommendations of the agencies to staffers or to whoever was sponsoring a bill. And it was always fascinating to me about the cherry stems or the lines that go deep into a wilderness and how they came about historically. It was a cattle drive or it was an old logging road. There was some reason why that deep cherry stem was actually suggested in the legislation. And maybe it still had some relevance for that particular area that was being considered in 1980. But today, if you look at where we are today, most of those needs or desires or how that cherry stem came about no longer exist. And so before retiring, I was fortunate to work with some congressional staffers as we were thinking about additions to existing wilderness to actually take another look, to revisit cherry stems and say, why? Why do we still have these? Why don't we make this a more comprehensive landscape and take out those deep cherry stems? And I think that's still important today as we either look at new legislations or we might even consider revisiting existing wilderness areas and ask, could in fact more wilderness acres be added to a unit because of something that no longer is necessary and no longer needed, and we could redo that line and have an amendment to an existing wilderness.
One piece that I was thinking about the chainsaw use, certainly I think the lack of ability to use motorized and mech has been an issue that people take up with the Wilderness Act since its inception. But I think one of the things that happens in present day is that we now have a culture, partly because of technology, partly because of funding for this kind of work, where there is a constant drumbeat of do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, do it faster, answer more emails, right? There's the volume of work that people are doing all the time is so significant. And I think that's similar even for wilderness trail crews. You hear people talk about being on a wilderness trail crew. One of our former board members had been on a wilderness trail crew in Olympic National Park in the 70s. And he said they had like 6 trail crews. And then when he was telling me the story, which was probably 8 years ago, he said now there is 1 trail crew and they also have to staff the wilderness permit office. And the wilderness permit office always has a line that goes out the door of the permit office and around the office. So their ability to actually get into the backcountry and do any work is super difficult. So I think that's part of the pressure we see now of people wanting to say, okay, we need to do it faster. We need to do it more. So I think part of the question for us in the wilderness sector is how can we take some of that pressure off? How can we slow things down so it's not so incongruous for people to be able to use traditional tools in the backcountry or take on a load of work that can do what needs to be done for wilderness with the tools we want them to utilize? I think that's a really big question that we could try and solve together.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Did we have a question from Cody? Did I see Cody's hand up earlier?
Hi. Yes, I had a quick question, more of a fun one, and also nice to meet you, Ralph. Thank you for doing this, but I really wanted to say hi to Peter and Heather a little bit just because I haven't seen them in a long time. So good to see you guys. Hope it's going well in DC. But my question is kind of inspired by our keynote speaker earlier today. Is there a moment in you guys' wilderness career, maybe out in the backcountry or something like that, that really kind of stuck with you as a manager and as an executive director, Heather, today, that kind of is something that kind of keeps you moving in this pathway and maybe just a good reminder in itself? Does anyone have anything like that?
I can go. I have one that I always refer to. So it's not technically designated wilderness, but I think it's probably the most wilderness of many places in the US. So one crew that I was leading was a crew that was a Native Ute youth crew, and we were doing projects on their traditional lands. And so we went way out on the Ute reservation. I had to get a special permit to go there, not being a Ute tribal member. And we drove like hours through all these washes with our 15-passenger van and trailer. But we got out there, and it was this incredible sky island in Utah, and it was the site of a traditional hunting camp. And so we were doing things like putting up buck and rail fence or fixing fence that was there, and we were doing some streamside vegetation, things like that. But this ecosystem was so untouched, and especially being a sky island, there were wild horses running there. If you sat still enough, birds would land on you. It was like traveling back in time to a time that was pre-settlement in how we think of it in first world countries. And that made such an impression on me. It was like getting to experience what the world was like when you as a human were more a part of the ecosystem than I think we operate now. And that has always stuck with me. I would like for everyone to be able to get that experience. And I would like to have enough wild lands that we could continue to have experiences like that.
Nice.
Heather, you're so wonderful. I will, again, fortunate to have my career and my time in the backcountry, and I've had so many experiences with so many people from all across America and from international guests, but there is one particular moment that always will stay with me. And it was as a backcountry ranger in the Raywall Wilderness of Colorado. We had one particular area that always received a high level of illegal camping, close to the trail, really in an area that we were trying to rehab and keep people from not using. And as I was heading into the backcountry from my patrol, I could tell someone was in this general area. I could hear them as I was climbing the switchback to the area. And I go, okay, here we go. First contact of the patrol, and it's going to be a violation, or at least trying to get someone to move, and just getting myself ready for that first contact. And I get up there, and it was a mother with her two young kids near the campfire area, the camp ring, their tent off to the side. And they were all, sorry, I'm choking up a little bit here because you'll stay with me forever. They were kind of crying in tears a little bit. And as I came in, I stayed my distance, but the mother brought me over. She wanted her kids to meet a ranger. And as the story goes, there had been a recent divorce in the family, and the mother thought it was important to take her kids to wilderness, so they could have time together. And that the fact that they chose to be in the Raywall Wilderness to heal is something that will always stay with me.
That's a great example, Ralph, of how wilderness can touch people and really provide that inspiration, or during times of difficulties, a way through. So certainly the therapeutic part of wilderness. I don't know, to answer Cody's question, mean, a few different thoughts of like moments that meant a lot to me when I was like 12 years old. Our family took a trip from Minnesota, where I grew up, to Montana, and I remember going into Glacier National Park. You know, it's not designated wilderness, but and just seeing a place where there's no billboards or there's no cornfields or there's, you know, it's just itself. It's allowed to be trees and mountains and stuff like that. I was like, that to me was sort of that moment where I knew that, oh, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to go into. And then going to school in Montana and working in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and those moments where you're back in the trail camp for weeks or months on end, and really getting into the pace of life at 3 miles an hour, and being able to, you know, it's like over the weeks and days, things peel away and you get a little bit more cognizant of what's around you and the sounds and the smells. But those are the kind of times that stick with me.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. That's great. Very inspiring. We've got a hand up from, looks like Catherine, is it Hughes?
Yes. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you so much. Ralph, wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that, and as well as Heather and Peter. So my question actually we can segue into that. It's a great lead in. So currently I'm a pathways intern for the Upper Snake Field office here in Idaho, at the BLM office there. And I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Idaho with got my Master's of Natural Resources from the MOS program. It's an outdoor education program in McCall. And then I am now doing my doctorate in natural resources. So my work has primarily been at the St. Anthony Sand Dunes off-road vehicle management area. So that's a duly designated SRMA as well as a WSA. So my graduate work is primarily qualitative based. So I work with communities in that area as well as across Idaho to facilitate conversations about how they would like, you know, our public lands to be managed. And so in those conversations, one of the aspects that often comes up is this idea of wilderness and wilderness study areas and that designation. And so I was just wondering if you all could maybe expand upon the comments you were just making about facilitating conversations with individuals who may not understand or agree with a wilderness designation. And how, so not only facilitating those conversations, but maybe just some tips and tricks with helping to instill some of those values that it sounds like, Ralph, you were just sharing in your story from how people felt. So about what they were experiencing on the land. So I'll end it at that. Feel free, I can clarify any points, but I'd really appreciate your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah. Hey, Peter and Heather, if you don't mind, I'm going to start. And first of all, thank you for the question and wish you the best in your graduate work. That's fantastic. You know, because I've had a chance to really discuss wilderness with so many people over the time, you do start to pick up on some ways that might resonate or connect with some people that might not connect with others. For example, I've had to work a lot with ranchers and equestrian horse groups and others that don't always, you know, love wilderness, feel the same way about wilderness, see it differently. And it's been interesting to me. Roderick Nash even brought up anthropocentric and biocentric. And I've learned over the years of trying to find a common ground with someone that might see something different about wilderness than you do, that you really got to meet them on their level, on their value system, and understand where they're coming from. And so there's many times when trying to make a very anthropocentric point of view about why wilderness is so important for clean air, clean water, wildlife refuge, whatever you're trying to do, and it might not resonate with the person you're speaking with, then there are other ways to go at it. You know, there might be the simple fact that there's only, how many folks, 5% of the US landmass is wilderness. And are we not a rich enough country and a caring enough country that we can have both? We can have land for protection and preservation of its wilderness character for future generations, and also have all the other things that people value, whether it be working the land, developing the land, or wherever they're coming from. And so sometimes it's just stating the facts that we need both. We need to find a place of harmony between wildness and development, or whatever it is. And I guess I'm just trying to get at is walking in their shoes a little bit. And it's been hard for me to learn that over my career, but it is important to understand not everybody loves wilderness to the same degree or the way you do, but they love wildness. When it comes down to it, everybody at the core loves nature and loves wildness. So find that common ground.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that. I mean, Ralph is the master at that connection and really getting to know people and their passions for wilderness.
Yeah, that was a great answer, Ralph. And it's funny, I was thinking about, so Catherine and I did my master's degree at the University of Idaho, and my thesis was about the intersection of the self and public land. So looking at various 6 schools of psychology and how that influenced behavior and conceptualization from a personal viewpoint of public lands. And it's funny because like Ralph basically just said everything that I researched just because of his experience. Like he just like already knew it. But what the research showed was you can't change people's value sets once they're adults. Value sets are really created in childhood. And it also, the research also shows, which I know none of us really want to believe, that public education doesn't really work, not early public education, but if you're doing broad scale user public education, doesn't work if you're trying to change behaviors, then you have to come after it a different way. And so I completely agree with what Ralph said as far as like finding the value sets that they do have. One way in which I've done that that has worked in some places is to talk about wilderness as an ecological savings account. So if you have someone who is maybe not that stoked on having the designation or on environmental preservation per se, if you're saying, you know, what we need to be able to continue an industrial society are some of these natural resources, and if we use them all at once, then we won't be able to continue our business and our local economies. And so we have this as a savings account that helps feed into adjacent landscapes. I've used that as one kind of talking point. But I think it's that piece that Ralph said of finding out where people are at and finding a way to speak to it there, and knowing that not everyone will support it. But I would say, I think there's another piece of, there is a large scale misunderstanding in some areas of what wilderness does, and a drumbeat can happen that's like, wilderness is bad, wilderness is restricted. So sometimes you can speak to that and have shed some light on it for folks. But basically I agree with Ralph, just like Peter said, he says it best.
Thank you guys so much. That's fantastic. It's definitely been it's been a challenge over the years to really try to facilitate those conversations with folks. But I almost feel like having, I don't know, it's difficult in, you know, research or graduate research in general, where we're trained to be unbiased with what you're talking about, but yet you need to have this, well, my perspective, should maybe try to be a little bit empathetic towards individuals as well, to really get at that piece of where are they actually coming from, put yourself in their shoes in order to truly understand what that perspective is. And so that's challenging in itself to have both of those perspectives. So anyways, thank you all so much. I appreciate that information.
Well, that's pretty good. Thanks. I'm just enjoying listening to everybody's perspectives on these answers or responses. But I do have a question for the team, since I don't see another set of hands or any questions in the chat. And I know when we had our registrations showing up, we had a lot of folks maybe a little earlier in their careers. And I think my question to you all would be, what do you think the next generation of wilderness managers or wilderness NGOs should do or needs to do to advance their careers and better their careers in the wilderness realm? So a little more of the helping out the next generation of these people that are going to be taking care of these lands.
I'll jump in there real quick. It reminds me of was that like one of those leadership trainings here in Washington, D.C. a few years ago? We had a senator come and speak to us, and he knew we were a group on wilderness. It was a mix of land management people, but for whatever reason, wilderness came up in his mind. And he said, well, wilderness management, you're not really managing the wilderness, you're managing people. And it was sort of like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess that's right. You think back like on a lot of issues, whatever they are, and you backtrack and you're like, I guess that's a people issue. You're managing people and the communications with them. So I think that is a real important part of for up and coming, is that understanding of, if you are sort of like me on the Myers-Briggs, I'm an ISTJ, introvert, want to be out there alone in the woods or something like that. It's like, maybe I should not have gotten into this line of work. I think you need to be more of a gregarious person who will who looks forward to being in large meetings and working with the public and communicating with them. I think that's a really important trait for sort of the next generation of people coming up in wilderness management, is that realization that it's people management and understanding their issues, concerns, and being able to diplomatically address that. So I was just sort of think that, and a lot of things that I think Heather and Ralph are talking about are really that aspect of people management and those interpersonal skills.
Peter, if I could follow that, and Heather, I'm looking at you here, because this is when I'm asked a lot about the managers of the future and the skills they need to bring to the table. And Peter, you're just my champion on this one. To have an understanding of wildness throughout the world, to have international exposure, is so tremendously important for the managers of the United States to see what is happening globally and to connect, to be involved with the international community of protected areas, which Peter does so well. But I would just offer, if anybody out there is trying to see what they can add to their toolbox, an international assignment is a must. Secondly, and Heather, this is you, I think it's so important for today's managers to make themselves more marketable, and to have a background where you've actually conducted a wilderness stewardship, wilderness character project. You've done something on the ground with wilderness character monitoring, something that brings those skills to the table, that shows you understand what is the assessment needed in wilderness and what is needed to take care of that wilderness. And this is where the skills that you can learn from wilderness character monitoring, from the stewardship performance, all the things that we do back there, you need to gather as many skills as possible. And SWS does a wonderful job of giving you that opportunity. And then finally, that just a level of persistence, that there's so few opportunities to get a permanent job in wilderness or to advance in wilderness and stay within the field of wilderness without getting pulled to fire or whatever else. That persistence, that no, this is what I want to do, this is important to me, and don't give up. You know, if you're a seasonal ranger and you can't seem to, the door's not opening for you, don't give up. It's the best job. It's the best job in the whole wide world. And you'll look back on your career and your soul will be richer for your time in wilderness.
Well, it's hard to follow that, but thank you for the plug for SWS. That was the first thing I was going to say. If people want experience in this job, come work for us. We're always, not always hiring, but a lot of times we are hiring and we'd love to have you with us. I think, you know, the pieces that go so well with a wilderness career are the ability to be flexible, the willingness to go somewhere, the willingness to try new things. Actually, when I hired Cody, who asked a question earlier, he didn't have any specific wilderness experience. But what I loved about talking to him is that he had done just adventures in his life. He had gone on a road trip with buddies. A few things had gone wrong. He had figured out how to get out of it. He was flexible. I was like, well, are you willing to, you know, fly to Alaska in a couple of weeks? And he was like, sure. And I was like, all right, let's do this. So I think those are important perspectives to have. I also really think, you know, it's so difficult when you are early in your career to listen to yourself and voice what it is that you think, what your perspective is. But the wilderness world really needs that. They need your perspective. If you're coming in from the outside, if you're early in your career, what it is that you see, how you envision wilderness, what it means to you, why you got involved in it, what do you think the future of it should be? Those are the pieces that people really need to know, because all of us that have been doing it for so long, we are so ensconced in it, we can't see that anymore. We need that perspective. So I would just say, as you embark, or if you're early in your career, don't be shy about sharing that. I think that the people who are around you will really benefit from it, and the wilderness will benefit from it as well.
If I can jump in there too, just sorry, I go back on it. I think one is also thinking about your added value. What do you bring to the table? And this is following up on what Heather was just saying. I think for myself, is having worked in lots of different agencies, so I can say, you know, they did this in Park Service or did that, and you sort of bring down some new different ideas, but also sort of just thinking of that added value of where you can be that person to add something new into. Maybe they don't have the background or knowledge. You know, it could be something pretty simple, just, you know, knowledge of social media or whatever it may be, and they're like, and you've added the value, or like they you know, you're needed within that work group. So just finding that opportunity, seeing, you know, scoping out the landscape, so to speak, of whoever you're working with and where their needs are, and helping try to fill that need. In my younger years, I saw there was a lot of discussion about laws. You know, this law can do that. You know, whether it's the Wilderness Law or Wild Scenic Rivers Act. And I said, this law stuff seems important. So I went off to law school, got a law degree, and that sort of was another added value. I could bring that within our, you know, and every day we're talking law, regulation, policy in the position that I have. So I think it sort of paid off on that aspect.
Well, I think, I don't know if anyone on the team is watching the time. I think that kind of wraps us up. I'd actually like to keep going. There's some really fun things to learn and hear perspectives, and, you know, it's just been terrific. So is there anything else, any parting comments? I think we're going to wrap up. We've got, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that comment. This was kind of fun. This was, I think, a new thing that we were going to try. Didn't know how it would go. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and really want to thank you for joining the session.